Today on Photo Kitchen, we're talking about the latest update to Adobe Lightroom Classic and the one feature no one else is talking about. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 105 of Photo Kitchen. I am your humble host, MD Welch, and today we're talking about the latest release of Adobe Lightroom Classic, version 12.3. Now, 12.3 is generating a lot of buzz on the internet because of a few new features that are probably going to have a radical impact on your workflow. Now, before we get into those, I want to talk about the first one and one of my favorite features in this new release. So this first feature is found in the Develop module over on the right-hand side. If we take a close look at our panels here, we will see that there is a new user interface, and that is this small set of eyeballs for each panel. Now, these eyeballs are really not new, or at least their functionality is not new. There are little pin switches, almost like little dip switches or pin switches on the back of printers back in the day, that would allow you to turn these panels on or off to see what your image would look like with these panels not actually impacting the image. Kind of a before and after for each panel. Now, these switches, these little interface icons were so small that a lot of people never noticed them and never used them. So now we have a larger interface or a larger design, an eyeball. This also matches up the interface found in Photoshop, matching up with like the layers panel or the pass panel, so you could turn these things on or off. But a big thing that's here now is you also have an eyeball or an ability to toggle the basics panel on or off. You never had this ability beforehand. If you wanted to see what the image looked like without the basics panel being applied, you would have to turn off all of the panels and then do some sort of keyboard shortcut for before or after, or use the before and after functions found in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. It was tedious. So it's good to see that Adobe has brought this in, because while this seems to be a very simple, basic kind of thing, it will have a radical impact on the time that you're saving when you're editing your images. From the very basic to the next big feature, we're going to talk about noise reduction. So if I go to the detail panel, we will find the feature that has all of YouTube and the internet buzzing, and that is Denoise. Denoise is an artificial intelligence or machine learning process that reduces noise in your image. Before this feature was introduced, you had to use normal noise reduction, or now called manual noise reduction, where moving sliders around, you had to use your best judgment, maybe some secret formulas based on ISOs to get noise reduced inside of your image. And in Lightroom and in Photoshop, noise reduction was not always the best. This is a reason why plugins have become such a big part of a lot of photographers' workflow, because the most popular plugins are usually noise reduction plugins. Now, here at Photo Kitchen, I'm 100% organic, non-plugin based workflow. I don't feel like I should be giving extra money for features that Adobe should have included years ago. But this does also mean that my noise reduction is not as good as fellow photographers who are using these plugins. Denoise is going to change that. Now, there's going to be comparisons by other YouTubers on, is Denoise better than some of these other programs out there? And that's going to be probably their expertise on this. I will say, in using this in a limited amount of time, that Denoise has shown to be a very powerful feature and will be part of my workflow. And very well, manual noise reduction might not ever be used again. So let me back up. I'm going to go back to my library module. I have a few different versions of this image. I'm going to come into here and show you that I have an image, and I'll zoom into here. I have an image where I am at 100% and with zero noise reduction. And then my next image has some sort of manual noise reduction to have some sort of comparison to this. So I'm going to go back to the image that has zero noise reduction done to it. And I'm going to come back to the Develop module and choose Denoise here. Now, one thing to point out when you're doing Denoise is that it does not work in a non-destructive workflow manner. And when I say that, I'm going against what a lot of other people are saying on this update, that it is non-destructive. It is not non-destructive. It is going to make a brand new file for you. So it will remove all of the noise and create a DNG with this reduction in it. Is it still camera raw? Yes. Is that image still non-destructive in its basis? Yes. But you are getting a second version of the image. I want to point this out because if you have 150 images and then you apply Denoise to all 150, you're now going to have 300 images occupying space on your hard drive, opposed to virtual copies, which Lightroom Classic does so well. So in the denoise controls, it's very straightforward. You have one real control, and that is the amount of denoise. And then you have some additional options that are turned off because I am not using any sort of resolution increase, nor am I doing any sort of raw detail work. I can have this included in the stack, which would make it a more efficient workflow. You won't have 300 thumbnails. You would still have 150 thumbnails. I highly recommend using Create Stack here for this. I have a small window, and I'll come up. Let's go to the eyeball in question here and take a look at that. And you could see such a radical change in the actual detail of the image. Such a huge amount of noise reduction. Now you are seeing the noise, especially the color noise being applied here at the same time, which is automatically turned off or reduced when you're first coming into Lightroom Classic. So you are seeing a fair amount of noise that you normally don't see in the image, but Adobe is showing you this. But look at all the details still in the hair. And this is areas that usually I find when I'm doing noise reduction has a tendency to get blurry or smudged when doing some sort of noise reduction here. And this looks really clean for such a high ISO image. This was 128,000 ISO, so fairly high, very high for my Sony a7R Mark IV, which produces a fair amount of noise to begin with. And also, I want to point out that I have my slider at 100%. I'm going to back it off to say 75. We'll go ahead and take a look here. You could see a little bit more noise come through there. Maybe 75 might be just a little bit preferred, but you could see how quickly you could see these results. And the good news is you only have one slider to worry about opposed to 2 or 3 sliders when you're doing normal noise reduction. I'm going to go ahead and click Enhance. And through the power of editing, we now see that the image is complete. If I come back out into my library module here and go back into attribute and see these, you can now see that I have these 3 images. The first one is the noise reduction. The second one is with no noise reduction. And the third image is with basic noise reduction. So you can see that the basic noise reduction or the manual noise reduction still has a fair amount of noise in it comparatively to the denoise. So no muss, no fuss, one slider control, and a radical impact on noise reduction. But again, I now have a second physical file occupying my hard drive. It's also a DNG. However you feel about that, just know that that is part of the workflow process. Now, the last feature I want to point out has kind of been pushed to the back because everybody's talking about noise reduction, and well, they should. This is an amazing feature. It is definitely going to have a significant impact on people's workflow. But this other feature has been kind of lost, and I want to talk about that. And that is the ability now to apply a mask and have a curves adjustment. So I'm just going to come in here, make a quick selection of the subject, and I have a mask here. And if I come in and go below here to my in my masking controls, I'll come into curve and I have all of the controls for the tone curve adjustments found here. And this is very nice. It's nice to see that this feature has now been included. So many people have been wanting curve adjustments as part of masking, and it's fantastic. However, I'm going to show you a feature that not a lot of people are talking about that you might want to utilize as part of your workflow. I'm going to go ahead and delete this mask and start over again. Now, one thing to point out, actually, before I create the mask, one thing I want to stress, and I've talked about this in other videos before, I don't use tone curve a lot inside of Lightroom Classic. In fact, this is a reason why I prefer Capture One over Lightroom, because the tone curve inside of Lightroom Classic does not have any sort of opacity controls. If I go too far in one area or another, I have to come in and manipulate this curve, which could be tedious and time consuming. I could also make mistakes. Inside of Capture One or even Photoshop, I'm able to put this inside of a layer control and be able just to make a reduction to the layer's opacity. So if I've gone a little bit too far, I could just back off a little bit and dial in my curve adjustment without having to spend a lot of time manipulating the curve. I know that sounds very petty, but it is a significant thing that I do in my particular workflow, and you might make in your workflow now that you see this. So rather than doing a tone curve adjustment in my normal adjustment to the image, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask, but instead of using some sort of masking of the person, and by the way, I do want to point out a nice feature now is you do have the ability to make masks based on clothing, as well as they've changed some of the names here. Instead of face skin, it's facial skin. If my subject had a beard, you could select the beard color as well. So there's a lot of different masking options. But instead of doing that masking option for a person or a part of a person, I'm going to go old school here. I'm going to click on brush. And I've made the size of my brush massive. I'm actually gonna zoom out just a little bit just to show you this. I have auto mask turned off, and I'm just gonna come in and I'm gonna paint the whole image or the whole area with the mask. So the mask itself is now completely filling up the image. It's completely white. So whatever I do here is going to happen to the entire image. I don't know why Adobe doesn't give you the ability just to do a whole mask and create a mask based on that. They always want to do some sort of masking where you have to make some sort of selection first, rather than saying, hey, just give me a whole mask field. So small, tedious thing that you have to have a workaround for. The brush is probably the best. But now that I have this, and I'll go ahead and come back in and make this a fit to screen here, I'll come into my curves and I'm just going to come in and do a strong contrast. I'll just make a strong contrast adjustment here using the preset down at the bottom. You could, of course, make your own presets. And of course, I have an eyeball control here, so I could turn this on and off. And you can see I have now increased the contrast. And it might be a little much. That's fine. Or it might not be enough. I could come up now to where my actual mask one is, and I can decrease the amount or increase the amount. I could actually go past 100. So if I thought I needed more contrast, rather than coming in and manipulating the curve, I could just move that slider past 100 and I'm adding even more contrast to the image. And just to have a clean workflow here, I will rename my mask to contrast. Now, it might seem weird to do this, but this does give me a lot more control. You might find it even gives you a lot more control, allows you to dial things back. Maybe the contrast looks fine on the screen, but you print it and it looks a little bit heavy. Now you don't have to come in and manipulate points. So you can just come into the mask, reduce the amount, and have the actual contrast that you want in a matter of seconds, rather than having to get lost inside this curve window. So these are the major features that I think you should focus on the most in version 12.3 of Adobe Lightroom Classic. I hope you liked this video, and speaking of liking it, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, I would love to hear about what features you're using or you're excited to use in this updated version, and also what features you thought Adobe should have included in this version, but you're still waiting on. Me personally, I really want to see color grading be a part of masking. I really need color grading as part of masking. I need my opacity control. I want that just like I have it inside of Capture One. So until next time, this is MD Welch wishing you all the best from Photo Kitchen.